Hello, my name's Jim and I'm an alcoholic. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be of service to Alcoholics Anonymous anywhere at any time. The life I have today is for one reason and one reason only, and that's the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and the relationship that I've found with a higher power through this program. I brought out some notes with me. It's been a while since I've done this, and I don't want to skip any of the details over the next couple of hours of what happened and how I got here. To qualify myself a little bit, my sobriety date is January 2nd, 1991. I have a sponsor. His name is Brendan O. He lives in St. Augustine, Florida. I sponsor people, and I have a home group. My home group is the Tri-Noon Group over at Triangle Club. To further qualify myself a little bit, and in full transparency, I've never had a DUI. I've never been arrested for drunk and disorderly. I've never been through a treatment program. I've always had a place to live. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, what the hell is this guy going to talk about? And you know, the answer is I'm going to share in a general way my experience, strength, and hope. Talk a little bit about what it was like, more about what happened, and a little bit about what it's like now. You know, first of all, if I could have stopped drinking on my own, I wouldn't be here. Why would I? If I could stop drinking and doing drugs, why would I come to AA? I wouldn't. I mean, it's a Thursday night, it's Valentine's. Y'all look like a good group of people. I have some friendly faces in here as well. But I could be doing a lot of things tonight. A lot of things tonight. But I'm here because I could not stop drinking. And I was an alcoholic when I walked through these doors, and I'm an alcoholic now. And I know that I still cannot stop drinking if I were to drink. So I come here to live a sober life. When I got to AA, I knew a lot of things, but I didn't know a damn thing about how to live sober. And I've been sober a while, and everything I know about living a sober life is because of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I love AA. It has given me everything that is good in my life. Has come through AA and has come through the God of my understanding that I've discovered in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I get very enthusiastic about this program. I mean, this program works. If you have a desire to stop drinking and you're willing to do what is suggested, and I love that word suggested because that's how I got hoodwinked in here as well, then you too can live sober and have a wonderful sober life. I'm originally from outside Philadelphia. I grew up in a very working class, middle class suburb. Yeah, I grew up, my mother was very young. She was 16 when she had my older brother, and I came along about a year and a half later, and in 1959, good Catholic girls married their husbands. And that lasted for a little while. They split up, and I was young enough when they split up that I don't ever remember living under the same roof as my mother and father. So we moved into my mother's parents' home, a little ranch house in the suburb of Philadelphia, and that's where I grew up. And there wasn't a lot of heavy drinking. There wasn't a lot of real craziness in the house. I wasn't surrounded by alcoholics or a lot of drunkenness or disorderly behavior in the house. And so it just wasn't part of anything that I grew up with. And I can remember it was a time and a place when you were a little kid and you could walk around the neighborhood. You know, we would go out the back door and we would come home for meals or when the sun set. And I remember during those times, you know, one of the grocery stores up in that area was Acme. And behind Acme was a big parking lot. We used to play stickball back there, and guys, we used to hang out back there. And this was the early 70s, 72, 73. And I remember seeing these, you know, these long hair hippie types back there. And, you know, you could tell they were up to no good because they had long hair and frayed jeans and facial hair. And you just knew that they weren't doing anything good. And I just told myself back then that there was no way I was ever going to be like that. And there's no way I was ever going to do drugs, you know. And about a year later, I started getting high. Don't remember exactly how that happened, but you know, one of these guys I was hanging around with had something, and we started smoking it, and I just thought this was really cool stuff. And so I was, you know, 12 or 13 when that started, and you know, you're pretty much of a young kid, and you know, guys would be able to sneak a beer or you know, from their dad's case, and it would be warm, but you drank it anyhow. And they would sneak a little bit of triple sec or something awful from the cabinet, and it was terrible, but you would drink it anyhow. And they would steal a little weed from their older brothers, and you would do all of this stuff. And it wasn't real regular, but you know, every now and then it was always special, and it was always cool, and it was always like, look, man, what we got. You know, we need to go down to the creek and do this. And then I remember hanging out with some of the older kids, and they would tease us. You know, they would get good stuff like, you know, Boone's Farm strawberry wine. They had, and I'll never forget. You know, this one playground is where the playground was, but there were hills leading up to some people's yards, and we would sit up at the top of the hill. And the old guys would say, you know, the way you do this is you take a big swig, you run down the hill, and you run back up the hill, and that'll really get you drunk and high, and it's the best. And so I didn't know any better. And I took my big swig, and I immediately ran down, immediately ran back up, and puked all over the stone wall. And these older guys thought that was the funniest thing they ever saw. And that was the kind of environment where I first learned how to drink, how to get high, how to find the stuff, how to find the guys who wanted to do that kind of stuff too. And that's what I was interested in. Who were the cool guys who wanted to be cool like me and go out and get high and get drunk? And you know, that's the way my teens worked. I can't say I really got, you know, drunk in the sense that it changed my life until junior high school. And I remember this like it was yesterday. It was a party over this girl's house, and we were all 15 because nobody could drive yet. And I don't know how or why her parents let her have alcohol there, but she did. And I remember getting drunk, and it happened. It was that night when the switch happened. You know, my life changed that night because I was no longer awkward. I was confident, I was fearless, I could talk to the girls, I could hang out with the guys, I could be outgoing, I could be fun, and it was great. And it lasted maybe a half an hour until I puked up all over the place. And I just remember after I puked, I felt I was full of shame. I couldn't believe all this good stuff was going on in my life, and here I am, I'm puking all over the place. And as I'm kind of getting up and gathering myself, I looked up, and there were this group of girls that were there taking care of me. You know, are you okay? Here's a rag. Here's something to rinse your mouth out. And I was like the center of attention again. And you know, I didn't get into trouble because I don't think my mother found out. I remember waking up the next day, you know, feeling like hell, just hungover, my first hangover too, going into the bathroom, looking into the mirror through the bleary eyes, and just saying to myself, man, oh man, I can't wait to do that again. And that started my drinking to get drunk phase, my getting high to get wasted phase, and throughout high school, pursued that. You know, I was one of these kind of students where I always did well in school, and so I was in with the smart guys, but I always wanted to hang out with the burnouts. You know, I always wanted to hang out with the guys who were finding the booze, who were finding the drugs, and who looked like they were cool. Looked like they were cool the way I wanted to be cool. And that's kind of the way that my high school life went. I would hang out with these guys. We had cars, beat up old cars, and we'd go out and get our six packs. And you know, I grew up in a part of Pennsylvania that was very close to Delaware, because Pennsylvania drinking age was always 21. In Delaware it was 20, but in New Jersey it was 18. And you could go, you know, you could get an older brother's license. You could, you know, back then there were paper licenses. You could do things with them, exactly. And so finding the bars that would serve you or going out of state to get the booze was something that you could do if you could get there. And you know, we got there, and those were the days when it was, you know, weekend drinking, getting wasted, getting a couple of six-packs, getting some weed, finding some girls, and just for like 2 years, it was great. That's when I started not only drinking regularly, but my life started revolving around, when am I going to drink again? When am I going to get that next six-pack? Who's going to make the run Saturday? You know, that sort of thing. Finished high school. I went to college in West Philadelphia, where there was absolutely total freedom. You know, no mother, no rules. I didn't really have to go to class after all. And that's where my alcoholism really started blossoming, because there were no controls. The only controls that I had is, what could I afford or what could I mooch? And at one point during college, I remember making the conscious decision that I'm going to get into the pot business. And I'm going to sell pot because I'm going to make friends. I'm going to find people who like to do what I like to do. I'm going to make money. And I'm going to get all the pot that I want to smoke for free. In Philadelphia, the drinking age was 21, but there were plenty of bars around campus that would serve you. And at the corner of 44th and Spruce Street was a place called Murphy's Tavern. And this was, you know, in that part of my world, there were a lot of neighborhood bars. And when you grew up, where I grew up, that was the thing, you found your neighborhood bars. And when I was in college, I found my neighborhood bar. And I would go there literally every night, except for Sunday, because the blue laws in Pennsylvania, the bars were closed on Sundays. Murphy's Bar was a very Irish bar. You know, due to a thriving marijuana trade, every day was St. Patrick's Day at Murphy's Bar. That's where I learned to drink to black out, was at Murphy's. My drinking expanded to the point where I wasn't just getting drunk, I was getting blind, wasted, blacked out 4 or 5 nights a week. Not much of a student, but I was convinced I was getting my real education sitting on that bar stool hanging out with those guys. And I remember convinced that you could learn as much sitting in a bar talking to drunks as you could sitting in a classroom. That was where my 21-year-old mind went. Somehow or another, I made it out of that school with a degree. Not sure how, but I did, and I came to Atlanta. I moved here, I moved in with some guys, I found a job. I was set, I was ready to set the world on fire. I worked hard, I played hard, I drank hard. The drugs, for whatever reason, I got away from the drugs except for marijuana. I loved getting high, man. I just loved getting high. I still gotta be careful because I can go back there in a hurry. But the drinking was taking off. And even though I had my job, it was hanging on by a thread. Even though I had apartments, I was struggling to make rent. When I didn't have money, I had credit cards, and those are problems. You know? I was drinking every day, I was getting drunk every day, I was blacking out 4 or 5 times a week, waking up in strange places, waking up with strange people, having to rifle through the receipts to see where I was the night before, wondering how the hell did I get here. And it wasn't just the drinking, my thinking started to change. Because that feeling, you know, that elusive feeling that I got that first night in junior high when I got drunk, when alcohol did for me what nothing else would do. I chased that feeling for the next 15 years. But at some point in my 20s, that feeling left. And the feelings of shame started creeping in. The feelings like, how did that happen again? What did I do last night? How did I treat? You know, people come up to you that you swear you've never seen before, and they start screaming at you because of the way you treated them the night before. You know, that happened to me, and it happened more than once. And so alcohol stopped becoming something that made me the life of the party, and alcohol started becoming something that was eating me up on the inside. And I didn't know what to do about it, you know, because I couldn't stop. I'd wake up, I was in my 20s, so I had a lot of energy, you know, by a couple of cups of coffee, a little food, a shower. I'm not going to drink today. Today I'm just going to rest and recover. but by 2 o'clock I would have realized I overreacted, and that tonight I'll just have one, maybe two, and then I'll go home and I'll get a good night's sleep, and it would all start all over again. I couldn't stop once I started, and I couldn't not start. I didn't know how to do that. The first sort of breaking point, I mean, I lost my car on more than one occasion. You know, you wake up and you look out front, did the car not there? And you wonder, well, I wonder where the hell the car is. I was at Atkins Park over in Virginia Highland, and I used to go there quite a bit. I'm convinced that they had a plaque of my American Express card up on the wall thanking me for their profitable year. And so I got blackout drunk there and drove home. Well, let me put it this way. I woke up in my bed and I had this sneaking sensation that I didn't know where my car was, and I looked out the window and my car wasn't there. Except this time I didn't know where my car might be. And I had to call a friend, and it's the first time I had to call a friend to find my car, and we found my car. It was a couple of blocks away, and I vaguely remember parking on that street because I thought it was a nice street. And my friend said it was a good thing you don't like the interstates. But something happened with that time that I lost my car, that I knew I'd passed a point and I needed to do something, that alcohol was a problem. Because I had a lot of problems in my life. I still had a job, barely. I still had an apartment, barely. I still had, little relationships with my family. I could get dates, with girls. I could get a first date, maybe a second date, but after two, they would get a sense of what I was like and want no parts of that. And there are other things. My life was just falling apart, and I needed to do something to be able to control my drinking, because what I needed was some information about this alcoholism thing, about drinking problems, so I could learn about it, outsmart it, and get back to being a party boy and having a good time. So I did that. I researched, I went to a therapist. Therapist suggested that I go to AA. What an idiot. And I learned all these things, and I started setting rules for myself, that I'm going to stop after so many drinks. I'm not going to drink until 6 o'clock. And that worked well during the week, because I would work, and by the time I left work, got in the car, it would be 6, I could start drinking. And that lasted up until Saturday, because it was like 1 in the afternoon, and I had this 6 o'clock rule, and I realized I didn't specify 6 p.m. or 6 a.m., And there went that rule. And every time I made a little rule, I drew a line, I would cross it. And I did what any normal person would do. I draw a new line. And since I was a blackout drinker, and it was funny, when I was in college, I have a cousin. His name is John. He's now a member of our fellowship. And he was in the Air Force at the time, and they were running him out of the Air Force for being a troublemaker. A lot of it was drinking and drugging. And I said, John, why are they running you out? And he said, oh, they tell me I'm an alcoholic. I said, that's nuts. Why did they say that? Well, so he said, they give you this questionnaire, and if you answer these questions, they think you're an alcoholic. I said, well, what kind of questions are on there? And he said, I'll give you, for instance, one of them is, do you ever black out when you're drinking? And I said, that's a bunch of crap. I black out all the time, and I'm no alcoholic. And so I knew I had this drinking problem. I didn't want to be an alcoholic. I wanted to go back to the good old days. And every time I crossed the line, I had to draw a new line. And after enough lines, I decided to go to some AA meetings, and I started to figure out how you guys controlled your drinking, right? Where else do you go to find out how to drink as a drunk except to other drunks? And so I walked in and found out that you guys, you got this abstinence crap going on, and that was not for me. And so, I said, thank you very much, and you and your cult with your prayers and your baskets, and your clapping, and went back to figure out how to do it my own way. And every time I tried to do it my own way, I failed. And every time I failed, my thinking got worse. It got to the point where I couldn't live with myself. The shame of me being who I am and what I am got to be so bad, I didn't want to be me anymore. I hated myself. The self-loathing just increased, and I didn't know what to do. And I was in this really tough spot, but I had one line left that I hadn't crossed yet, and that was, as long as I don't black out, I'm okay. A guy I went to college with, I partied a lot with in college. His name was Bruce. He was coming through town, and I picked him up, and he said, "Come on, Jim, let's each go get a bottle of scotch and have a good time." And I said, "I don't know, Bruce. I don't think that's a good idea." And that was the extent of my effective mental defense, was I don't know. I don't think that's a good idea. Needless to say, I woke up the next morning on the floor. At least it was my own apartment. I don't remember what happened that night. I talked to Bruce still. He doesn't remember that night. And he's not part of this fellowship. There was that, the empty bottle of scotch laying across the floor. I'd been in and out enough of meetings to know where I was. The physical pain was awful. The head, my contacts refused to my eye, the dryness in my mouth, the lurching in the stomach, that was bad. But that was nothing compared to the shame that I felt on the inside. And that was my moment of pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And it was that morning that I had to admit that I was powerless over alcohol. Alcohol is bigger and badder than me, and it will kick my ass each and every time. And I am no match for alcohol. And I had to admit that morning, laying on that floor in such a horrible state. It was bigger and badder than me. Didn't mean I stopped drinking. Still took me a while of going in and out of this program to finally get into it. And when I got into AA, I did some things that I do not recommend to people. I immediately got on the step a year plan. It took me 3 years to get to step 3, and I don't recommend that because my ego and my self-will were so strong. I was even more miserable inside of AA because I had no alcohol, no drugs in my life, and I had none of the miracles of this program because I didn't take the suggestions. And so I went through this period of dryness, of white knuckling it, pretending that I was an active member of AA. I would go to meetings. I had a sponsor, but I wasn't really working the steps. I wasn't doing any service work. Prayer, sort of, and it was awful. It was a very hard time. The thing that kept me going was I did not want to go back. It had gotten so horrible inside when I was drinking that I did not want to go back. And it was that fight against going back was the only thing that kept me in here long enough before I could eventually surrender to win. And that was an interesting concept for me, surrender to win. I didn't surrender to win. I got you to surrender, and that's how I won. My juggernaut of self-will, if I wanted something, I would just come at you with everything that I had until you finally keeled over in exhaustion and said, okay. And I would get my way, because that's what I wanted, was my way. And so I didn't surrender to win. I got you to surrender, and that's how I won. And what I learned in this program is that's part of the problem. The problem is that I need to surrender to the fact that I can't stop drinking, that I don't know how to live sober, and that if I want to have a better life, I need to surrender to that. And I need to turn that over to something that is more powerful than me, because I am not powerful enough to stop myself from drinking. Because if I was, I wouldn't be here. Why would I? I started getting sober in the early 90s. And there were a lot of smoking meetings back in the early 90s. And I had quit smoking. I had a boss who was a Nazi about smoking. And so he got me to quit smoking. And I come to AA meetings, and all you could see were knees and feet. The smoke was so thick. And I really hated the cigarette smoke. So I found non-smoking meetings, because back in the early 90s there were a few of them, and so found a smoking meeting at NABA on Monday nights, and that's where I went for a lot of years. And there were a lot of people in that meeting who taught me about sobriety. They taught me how to live sober. I learned from those people in that meeting what it was like to live sober, how you practice these principles, how you work these steps, how you live this program. And I am forever indebted to that group. And the last few years of it was a group of older men, and I say that now as an older man, who taught me how to live sober. And these guys were patient, You know, they listen to your whining, they listen to your stories, and after they hear enough, they stop you and they say, what step are you working? Did you pray about that? Did you go help somebody? Did you go talk to an alcoholic? Did you find somebody who doesn't have as much time as you to go help them? You know, they're the ones that put that into me. That meeting fell apart sometime in the early aughts, 2001, 2002. And at that point in my life, I had decided that the purpose of Alcoholics Anonymous in my life was for me to build a relationship with a higher power. And I had done that. I had found a God in these rooms, and I extended that God to outside these rooms, and came to believe that I didn't need Alcoholics Anonymous anymore, that I would build my relationship with God, and that God would keep me sober. And that worked for a while. So I had a gap of a lot of years where I'd go to a meeting maybe to pick up my blue chip, maybe not. I'd go to a meeting to go see a friend speak, maybe not. But I didn't go to meetings until the thinking started turning again. The thoughts started coming back that I'm not who I thought I was, that my life is falling apart, that I'm a sham, that these things that I do, I really don't do. It's all a house of cards. It's going to fall apart. The same kind of shame-filled thinking that led me into these meetings was creeping back into my life. And I thought I could find it outside of AA. And the truth of the matter is, I couldn't. I started coming back to meetings about 6 years ago. I go to more meetings now than I've ever been to in my life. I'm more active in Alcoholics Anonymous now than I've ever been in my life. And I don't ever want to have a gap in my program again. I didn't drink. I didn't come real close to drinking, but I was miserable. And the only way to treat that miserableness was to jump back in neck deep into this program and work it with all I have. Reconnect with the God that I found in this program. Reconnect with the people in this program, but more importantly, reconnect with that God, because I can't keep myself sober, but that God can keep me sober. When I got here, I worshiped at the altar of self-reliance. I thought everything that I had in my life was because of me. I thought all the things that I had in my life, and I used to think they were good. Looking back, they weren't as good as I thought they were then. But at the time, it was because of me, of the work that I did. It was because of the effort that I put out. And when I had to finally admit that I am not powerful enough to overcome alcohol, I had to admit that my life of self-reliance was wrong. It was wrong. It wasn't. I needed to develop a God-reliance life. And our book talks about that. And I didn't know how to do that. How do you do that? And fortunately, the book gives me the instructions. God could and would if he were sought. God does not make too hard of terms for those who earnestly seek him. I had to learn through people who came before me and from people who are in here with me that what I needed to do was to seek. That's all. I don't have to find. I don't have to stumble upon. My job is to seek. And the other thing is that I learned I had to get out of the results business. You know, when I got in here as part of this self-reliance, it was all about getting my way. It was all about what I wanted. It wasn't about the journey. It was about how can I get this? And I would do whatever I would have to do to engineer the circumstances to get what I was looking for, to get what I thought I needed. And what I learned in here is that that was part of the problem too, is that I was trying to play God. By trying to create outcomes, by trying to make things happen in my favor, I was trying to play God. And I had to look at the record and see how well that worked, and it worked pretty poorly because I was in here with you guys and I was miserable in my life. So I had to learn to get out of the results business, that my job is to take the next right step, is to do the things that are in front of me, do them as best I can, and trust the outcome to God. And if you're a guy like me, that is hard. trusting the outcome to a God that I've never met, that I didn't know, I never got high with, I never got drunk with, and you want me to rely on this, turn my life over to it. That was hard. That was hard. And it was, the step of the year, the only reason that I would take those steps back then is because the pain would build up to where it was bad enough that I was either going to have to take that next step or I was going to have to drink. And that was the only way I was able to go forward and learn how to build a relationship with my higher power. And along the way, I discovered by now that the problem was me. The problem wasn't them. The problem wasn't it. The problem really wasn't alcohol. The problem was my alcoholism. That it was this disease of this mind, the body, and the spirit that was destroying me. And that was within me. And that the problem isn't something that I can look outside of myself to fix. The problem was within me, and that's what I needed to fix. I need to talk about my brother. I had an older brother. He was 16 months older than I was, same gene pool, grew up in the bed next to me. We never particularly got along. We were very different. We fought every day of our lives up until a couple of years in high school when we were both actively drinking and using, and we got along over the drugs and the alcohol. When I went to college, he stayed at home. We went our separate ways. We would stay in touch roughly through my mother, talk once a year, once every other year, see each other once a year, once every other year. And my brother, at 50 years old, died of this disease. He lived with my mother the last year or so. And if you haven't ever seen it, dying of cirrhosis is a very hard way to go. It's a very rough way down. And I saw him, and my mother took care of him that last year when he was bloated and the organs start shutting down, and the life that you lead as you are headed down, knowing that you're headed down, knowing where the road you are on is leading. My brother knew about AA. My brother said that he tried AA. I don't know what that means. It wasn't for him. Our book talks about weighing the alcoholic death versus the spiritual life, and how for we alcoholics that can be a difficult decision. And it must have been for him because he made the decision to die a drunk when he was 50 years old, about 9.5 years ago. I used to ask, why me? Why not him? I would ask God. I'd ask my sponsor, I'd ask my friends, I'd ask drunks, I'd ask people who knew us, I'd ask people, and I never got a good answer. And to this day, I don't think there's a good answer. If somebody's got one, please share it with me. And so I stopped asking that question. And so what I do now is I thank God that I did make it here. I thank God that I did come into this program that saved my life and has given me the life that I have now. I regret that my brother never made it here. It hurts this day. What it did to my mother was even worse. But I thank God that I made it here. I need to talk about my father. My father, as I said earlier, he and my mother split before I ever remember living in the same house with them. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, my father, by his own volition, made what he thought was the right decision and decided that he never wanted to see me or my brother again. I'm not the first kid to grow up with an absentee father or a single mother or parents of a divorce or anything like that. That's not what caused my alcoholism. But how it relates to my alcoholism is when I got here, I did not realize that I carried a resentment against my father. I would have gotten in your face if you would have said you got a problem with your father. I did my 4th step. My father was not on that list. I didn't think he belonged. Why do I have to make amends to him? He's the one that screwed me over. He should be making amends to me. Why do I need to go make amends to this guy? So I'm 8 or 9 years sober, and I've hit a wall in my recovery. I'm not growing. I'm not developing spiritually. I'm getting miserable again. I don't know what to do. And the thought came to me from outside this program that I need to find my father and forgive him. that I'm carrying that man around like a dead weight, and it's preventing me from growing in my relationship with God. And if I didn't grow my relationship with God, I'm going to go drink. And so found him. It took several months to find him. He had moved, and I had an address for him in Texas, and the irony is he moved to Florida about 45 minutes north of my mother, which I thought was beautiful. I found him. I forgave him. It was literally the 16-ton weight coming off of my chest that day. I can't tell you that we had a great relationship after that. My father is a broken man. Most of us are broken people. And he was no different. Tried to have a relationship with him. It didn't work. We stopped talking again for another number of years. He came back into my life, and we would talk, and I would see him once a year up until he died about a year and a half ago. We were never, I can't say I was close to him, but when he died, I was at peace. I was at peace. And I thank God for engineering those circumstances in my life, because I healed so much through that reconciliation with my father. And now I preach reconciliation, to people in and out of this program that have gotten estranged from loved ones. I preach the power of reconciliation, the healing that comes from being able to do that. I want to talk about a psychic change a little bit, because when I got here, in the doctor's opinion at the beginning of the book, it says that you need an entire psychic change. And in the book, when Dr. Jung is working with, what the hell was his first name? Roland Hazard. Thank you. That he tried to engineer this entire psychic change. And there's even a definition of a spiritual experience in the back of the book. And I didn't know what that was. I had done a fair amount of psychedelics by the time I got here, but I didn't think that's what they were talking about. And so what answered the question for me was the 12th step. The 12th step. Yeah. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. And so what I learned from that is that if I work these steps, I will find the psychic change, or the psychic change will come upon me, and I will be free of the obsession to drink. I want to put a quick plug in for the 9th step promises. When I first started coming here and I heard those read for the first time, I hung my hat on that. I listened to that. Those words caught me. They grabbed my heart. They grabbed my mind. If those could happen in my life, I want that. I want that. So those dark days at the beginning where I didn't have the miracles of this program and I didn't have drugs and alcohol to fall back on, I hung on to those promises like they were dear life. Because if they could come true for me, life would be good. Life would be good. And I'm standing here in front of you all tonight to tell you that they have come true. They call them promises for a reason. They call them promises for a reason, and those promises have come true in my life. And as long as I stay close to this program and I work this program on a daily basis, I live those promises. And let me tell you, it doesn't get any better than that. I'm going to wrap up. I like to read something to close from A Vision for You, which is the last chapter in the book. And I love just even the title of that chapter, A Vision for You. Because there's a couple of paragraphs in here that also grab me and mean an awful lot. It says, "We have shown how we got out from under. You say, yes, I'm willing, but am I to be consigned to a life where I shall be stupid, boring, and glum, like some righteous people I see?" And that's what I was afraid of. My life was all about getting drunk and getting high. If I can't do that anymore, what the hell am I going to do? Where am I going to go? Who am I going to hang out with? How am I going to spend my time? Am I supposed to sit here? I know I must get along without liquor, but how can I? Have you a sufficient substitute? Yes, there is a substitute, and it is vastly more than that. That's some good news. It is a fellowship in Alcoholics Anonymous. There you will find release from care, boredom, and worry. Sounds like a pretty good deal. Your imagination will be fired. I'd like to have my imagination fired. Life will mean something at last. The most satisfactory years of your existence lie ahead. I am 58 years old. I picked up a 28-year chip about 6 weeks ago. Thank you. I am convinced that my best years lie ahead of me still. Thus we find the fellowship in so will you. So will you. That's another promise. Thanks for letting me share.